broadcast will start in 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The Voice of Stockton. For more information on The Voice of Stockton, go to thevoiceofstockton.org.
This is KBCC 89.5 FM, Tracy, California, Peace and Justice Network of San Joaquin.
The views and opinions expressed in the following program do not necessarily reflect those of KXVS The Voice of Stockton or its parents, affiliates, management, and staff.
Gentlemen, and welcome to another amazing episode of the Phone Booth here on TVOSJ, the voice of San Joaquin. My name is Edward Heitman, and joining me as always in the studio is my good friend and co-host, Brian Rodriguez.
Hello.
How you doing today, man?
Pretty good, pretty good. How about you?
Doing pretty good, pretty good. Now, for those of you who might be first-time watchers of the show, the Phone Booth is a show that is completely dedicated to the world of pop culture. Anything from movies to comics to video games to TV shows, you name it, and we do our very best to cover it. Now, before we get into topic today, I do want to emphasize we are always looking forward to hearing about little bits of news that you, the audience, would like for us to cover. So if there's anything that's going on out there, anything at all that you think might be of interest, be sure to let us know on our Facebook page, or if you know us personally, shoot us a message, and we'd be more than willing to talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, today is a good day, honestly, because for the first time in 2 weeks, we actually have a bit of news to talk about.
There's been a bit of a news drought, given, Endgame is sort of swallowing all the movie news, and E3's coming up, so it's been sort of slow with video game news, but we finally have a good chunk of news to talk about.
We finally have a good chunk of news to talk about. Now, in exchange for that little bit of news, however, I'm afraid that today's episode we don't have any discussion topics. But, if anything, our news topics for today will serve as proper discussion pieces.
Mm-hmm.
So, without further ado, let us begin with the weekly recap. Now, in case, again, if you're the first-time watcher of the show, in the weekly recap we talk about some of the news that has happened within this week and kind of give our general opinions on it. We have our list of topics here, and we'll start off with the first one. Now, Senator of Missouri, Josh Hawley, has introduced a piece of legislation that would ban loot boxes and pay-to-win mechanics from video games. Now, in case you're unfamiliar with what a loot box is, basically in certain video games, if you complete a mission, you would get what's known as a loot crate, which inside the crate would contain in-game items that you could either use on your characters, like cosmetics, or something to enhance your general gameplay. And now in some games, loot boxes are free. You can unlock them by doing daily missions and things like that. But some games also heavily emphasize on you buying loot boxes in order for you to increase your odds of winning in whatever game it is that you're playing.
Yes.
Now, Hawley cited that Candy Crush, of all games, as an example of a game with predatory microtransactions, and has framed his argument around protecting children.
Yes, he listed Candy Crush as a game with, I don't believe it has loot boxes, but it does have, small microtransactions that are very easily accessible to children that will allow you to either, completely skip a level or make a level easier, things like that.
Yes. I'm familiar with what he's talking about in this game because when you do play Candy Crush, you do have the options to buy in-game items to enhance your ability of winning a game. You have the odds of certain power-ups popping up at the very beginning. You also have like hammers and rockets that will clear lanes and stuff like that. So there are definitely microtransactions. Honestly, though, I'm kind of surprised that he mentioned Candy Crush as the example. When it came to loot boxes, I really thought he was going to talk about Battlefront 2, because that was one of its biggest issues, was loot boxes and microtransactions.
Well, I think him using Candy Crush as an example is really smart because, well, we, in the pop culture and video game industry know, what Battlefront 2 is. That's probably less known to the average citizen. However, Candy Crush is just everywhere.
Yeah.
And it does have that sort of stereotype of your mom is the one that plays Candy Crush. And that is somewhat true for a lot of people. So it's good that he's trying to target a larger audience than just, people that play video games, or I mean, Candy Crush is a video game, but your stereotypical video game player, and is reaching out to the wider audience of the moms of video game players, or the parents of video game players, or just the average people out there.
Yeah, that's very true. And to be honest, I am glad that they're trying to get rid of loot boxes, because in some instances, like say Battlefront and other games like that, it's way too easy for somebody to pour a bunch of money into loot boxes and completely dominate in the game compared to somebody who will spend huge hours of their time grinding through the game just in hopes of getting the one legendary item that somebody got easily for like 10, 15 bucks.
Yeah, because the contents of loot boxes are almost always random. Some places use a knockout system where once you get an item you won't get it, but that is extremely rare. Usually it's random. It's very easy to get duplicates. The highest level stuff has a ridiculously low drop rate, though that's kind of hard to tell sometimes since they obscure it so much. Actually, we have China to thank for some of the drop rates we do know, because there's a law where if you have loot boxes in a game in China, you have to disclose the drop rates.
Yeah, and at one point in time, this was also used as a gambling mechanic, too, with loot boxes, with Counter-Strike Go.
Yeah, there was an entire gambling controversy where items from loot boxes were being sold for real money through online casinos. It was an entire thing. I haven't thought about that in a while. I should check in on see what's going on with that.
Yeah, I remember when that popped up in the news, that was, like, one of the biggest things going on, because it was one of the people who was behind Counter-Strike that had set up... No, the person who set up the website themselves was promoting it as them doing random gambling. But yeah, I'm really glad that this is being dealt with, and while some people might enjoy loot box mechanics, I don't, and I really hope that this does get dealt with, because games could do a lot better without loot boxes, in my opinion. Anyways, Brian, you go ahead and take away to the next topic.
DNA, the mobile game studio that's partnered with Nintendo for many of their mobile games, including Fire Emblem Heroes, Super Mario Run, Animal Crossing Pocket Camp, the upcoming Mario Kart Tour, is working on a new Pokemon mobile game. It's unknown what form the game will take, but given that most of DNA's previous mobile games for Nintendo have basically just been mobile ports of the standard setup for these games, Animal Crossing Pocket Camp is an Animal Crossing game, as opposed to Pokemon Go, which is, a sort of a new spin on the game. DNAs tend to be much more faithful. So it makes me hopeful that we may just be getting a straight-up Pokemon RPG-type experience on mobile.
And you know what? I do hope that does become reality, because from what I've played from other games, it is very possible to have a mobile just a mobile phone version of a Pokemon game. The game that comes to my mind when thinking about this is Pocket Morty's, the Rick and Morty mobile game that got released from Adult Swim Games, which is literally a complete clone of Pokemon, but you just play as a Rick and you're using Morty's instead of Pokemon. And I played it when it first came out. It was really successful. And then they introduced things like online PvP. They introduced trading mechanics. And the game's gotten just way more popular ever since then. So, yeah, a mobile version of Pokemon sounds very possible. And it does sound very successful if it does get made.
And I'm excited for it because it'll have microtransactions. That's just the reality of mobile gaming now. But Nintendo has always been very good about not being too predatory. Actually, with one of their recent games, Regalia Lost, they actually made the developer increase the chances of getting rare characters from the, mobile sort of gacha game mechanics because they didn't want them to be too predatory, because they're aiming these games at children. And that's why I love Nintendo, is they seem to genuinely care about their player base and their actual, reputation, other than just making the most money.
Yeah, I always had to give props to Nintendo about that. They always cared about the players, and they're also one of the few companies that genuinely cares about the people behind the scenes as well.
Yeah.
Just good guy Nintendo. You can't really go wrong with them. So
Nintendo is one of, I think, the only AAA developer and publisher that is unambiguously on my good list.
Right. Same here, man. Same here. Anyways, on to the next little topic. Now, in case you've been if you haven't been following the shows that are going to be announced on Disney Plus's streaming service, recently we were told that there's going to be another season of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. that is coming out.
It actually started airing, I believe, a few nights ago.
Yeah, and I'm glad, because from what I heard, there was a brief period of time where people weren't sure if they were even going to continue Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. After the last season. However, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Season 6 won't be following the MCU timeline. According to producer Jed Whedon, the show's writers simply couldn't plan around the events of Infinity War and Endgame, so he elected to instead have the 6th season take place in its own timeline. This is unsurprising, given that Agents of S.H.I.E.L.'s ties to the larger MCU have become weaker and weaker as the show went on.
Yeah.
Now, I can definitely agree with that. One of the running jokes that people always seem to have when it comes to Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. is it's one of those TV shows where it's like, oh, look, Iron Man just flew across this building. Oh, can I see it? Oh, no, you have to believe me. I totally saw Iron Man for a second.
Yeah, it's gone from in season 1 there being full-blown crossovers with Thor: The Dark World and Winter Soldier to, I believe in season 5 there were like 1 or 2 mentions of Thanos, and that was it. That was the amount of it. Because it's really, especially with, again, Infinity War and Endgame, the snap and then all the events of Endgame, that would have been impossible for the writers to plan around.
Yeah, especially given how secretive they were about Infinity War and Endgame. A lot of actors who were there on set didn't even really know the full events of the movie, so it would have been impossible to build a show tied up to the events that they probably didn't even have the full information on as they were working on it,
Yeah, for Endgame, the only actor to read the full script of the movie was Robert Downey Jr., and even for, like, the Ant-Man and the Wasp after-credit scene where people get dusted, apparently the actors getting dusted didn't know what they were reacting to, because Marvel was keeping it such a secret, so they had to, like, refilm it a few times.
Oh, wow, I didn't know about that.
Yeah, it was crazy, the amount of secrecy. The actors weren't allowed to know what they were acting.
That's crazy. But, I can understand why they're being so secretive given people like Mark Ruffalo, who just has a track record of spoiling everything.
Ruffalo, Tom Holland.
Yeah, at least Tom Holland tried to save himself with the latest trailer.
Yeah. And you'll notice Mark Ruffalo and Tom Holland didn't do a lot of press for Endgame and Infinity War.
Yeah, so. But getting back to Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., I am glad that they're, regardless of it's doing its own timeline, I am still glad that they're carrying on. Marvel Works have known to be pretty good going on their own timeline. I know it's not connected to the MCU in general, but I really enjoyed Venom when I got to see it, and that's not necessarily tied to the MCU. It's kind of its own little Sony cinematic universe and whatnot. So, I don't really think this will really impact the show at all, especially because Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., it has its own little thing, It's not necessarily connected to the MCU, but it's such a good show that it doesn't really need to be connected to the MCU,
Yeah, it has gotten better. And I think it's good that Marvel seems to be backing off this entire interconnected universe with all the TV shows taking place in it. Like, I remember one of the producers for Cloak and Dagger on ABC, or Freeform, or whatever, whichever one.
I think it was Freeform.
Freeform. Said that there were basically no ties to the MCU, that technically took place in the same universe, but don't go in expecting any sort of crossover from it.
Mm-hmm.
Which, at a certain point, that's what you have to do.
Sometimes things just seem to be a bit better when they're not focusing on the bigger picture. One example that a lot of people have been talking about, which comes to my mind, is Aquaman when it recently came out. Mm-hmm. It's a DC Cinematic Universe movie, which does not really focus on the DC Cinematic Universe. It is just a tried and true Aquaman movie, and a lot of people seem to really enjoy it.
Same with Shazam.
Same with Shazam. So, I think it would do really, really well.
Yeah.
Anyways, go ahead and take away the next little topic.
Ubisoft has announced a sequel to Ghost Recon Wildlands entitled Ghost Recon Breakpoint. It will be a direct sequel to Wildlands, taking place 5 years after that game, and will take place in the fictional Oroa Islands, which is good because they sort of bungled the real-world setting of Bolivia and Wildlands.
Really?
Yeah, it's not a great look when you portray an entire Latin country as being completely overrun by drug dealers.
Yeah, you know what?
And having, the buff Americans come in and, act without any real authority, just shooting everyone to save the country.
Yeah, that's not good at all.
Yeah, it didn't work out great. But apparently this game will have a much larger focus on future technology compared to the last one. I believe the producer said it was closer to the Future Soldier game from, I believe, 2012.
Huh.
Which is interesting. The main villain will be Cole D. Walker, played by John Barenthal, a former ghost who was actually recently introduced into Wildlands as an ally for a few missions. So I was talking to you about this earlier. I really like that bit of synergy where they actually added in the villain of the next game as an ally with a few missions, so you could actually get to know him and what he's about before you buy the sequel. I think that's a great use of the live service, aspect of Wildlands.
I do think that's really interesting because in all honesty, I don't really have too many examples of games that do that, you know? Like, the villain was originally introduced as a good guy, and then in the next installment you find out, oh my gosh, he's a bad guy. The only example I can think of was the Prototype series, where the protagonist of the first Prototype became like an antagonist of the second Prototype game.
I think they did that in the Modern Warfare part of Call of Duty, the Modern Warfare games, though I don't remember exactly.
I think it was Makarov or
Makarov,
something.
I think is...
You know, and I mean, I think technically Elusive Man from the Mass Effect series counted, but he was also part of the enemy team Cerberus from the first place. So you could...
Yeah, he was always a villain. There was never that moment of you actually trusting him, I think.
Yeah, you know, but I think it's a nice little touch because, again, there aren't really that many scenarios nowadays in the video games that do that. You know, when the villain's introduced, they're just the villain, and that is it. You know, but you know, I think that's cool. You know,
let's hope they can stick the landing with this entire characterization of Ghost gone bad for seemingly good reasons. Of course, it's a Tom Clancy game, so I don't expect a lot.
Yeah, I kind of expect something close to a Modern Warfare remake, story-wise, at least. You know. Anyways, on to the next little topic. Now, this is an interesting one. It involves both Bethesda and Dungeons and Dragons. I love them both, regardless of 76. Now, Bethesda has been accused of plagiarizing a Dungeons and Dragons module for its recently released Elsewhere tabletop campaign. The campaign bears many striking similarities to D&D's The Black Road module from almost identical settings, DM notes, and combat encounters to seemingly copy-pasted descriptions and reusing a character's name, Chandra Stoll. Yeah. That is ridiculous, man. Bethesda has since removed the campaign from their site and are investigating the matter, though, honestly, shouldn't they be the ones being investigated?
Well, it's entirely possible they, hired some third-party developer or, I don't know what you'd call, I guess developer for tabletop games? I'm not sure.
They're developers.
Okay. And they probably hired a third party to make this and just put their branding on it, because that's what happens a lot with things like this, because this isn't, Bethesda's normal thing. But it's not a great look when they release this to promote their next big expansion for Elder Scrolls Online, also called Elsewhere. And you look at some of the text and some of the examples, and my god, it is just copy-pasted with, like, the find and replace tool used to replace, this with Dragonborn and that with Argonian.
Gosh.
It was just shameless. I fully believe someone could have done this in an afternoon with the level of, high school student writing a paper, an hour before it's due that went into this. It was just, wow.
Oh, gosh. Man.
And yet more not great news for Bethesda, especially not great considering they're also trying to market Rage 2, which is coming out I think on Tuesday?
You know what? I haven't been following the release date on that.
It's just there's been next to no marketing. And actually, this is a funny story, when a Forbes writer pointed out that there hasn't been a lot of marketing and that maybe they should step it up, Rage 2's account responded to him on Twitter with, "Lol, who even are you?" Literally, the official Twitter account for a video game published by Bethesda has resulted to high school level taunts. Like, really. This is what Bethesda has stuck into, because they've always sort of hated the press. They're one of those companies that really would just wish the press would just be, another tool in their marketing machine. But this is just, wow.
Honestly, after the whole Randy Pitchford meltdown, this isn't much of a surprise to me anymore.
Yeah, it's just...
That response, though, just who even are you, though?
Yeah, so once again, Bethesda's done a stupid thing. 2 stupid things, in fact. So,
What even happened to Bethesda, dude? Like, they were doing so well for a second, and then it's just burning, and it's crashing and burning, man.
They want money.
But...
They do not care how they get it or what bridges they burn. They want money. They are truly a AAA developer now.
My god, this is crazy. Anyways, man, you go ahead and take away the next topic, dude.
So, PUBG's PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds, one of the original Battle Royale games, their Chinese publisher Tencent has actually replaced the game's mobile version in China with one called Game of Peace, a battle royale purportedly honoring the Chinese Air Force. However, people have looked at the game and realized this is literally just PUBG Mobile, except they've replaced the bullet blood splatter effects with paintball effects.
Paintball effects?
Yeah, so like where you shoot someone and blood would come out, now it's a bright blue paint type thing. It really does look like PUBG just with paintball. Now, Tencent is claiming that this is a wholly new game developed in-house. However, multiple players that got on discovered that some of their progress from PUBG Mobile has actually transferred over to Game of Thieves, including, their character's last location and, game stats, things like that. Now, it looks like Tencent has done this because they could not get approval from the Chinese government to actually start making revenue off of PUBG Mobile for various reasons. So it seems like they are now marketing it as, this tribute to the Chinese Air Force, and it looks like they have actually been approved to make revenue. This is a thing. This is a thing that has happened, and wow. Yeah, it's actually kind of hilarious.
It really is. Because, man, do you remember Radical Heights?
I unfortunately do remember it. It was Cliffy B's attempt to leech off of the Battle Royale genre that failed and took the entire studio down with it.
The wannabe version of Fortnite, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was, Cliffy B's attempt to be edgy and, oh, this isn't your grandma's Fortnite, whatever that was. And it sank the studio because he just kept chasing trends instead of, doing what he thought he was and innovating.
Gosh, man. It reminds me too much of Radical Heights, only that instead of a ripoff, this is just a legit thing. And, for some reasons, this reminded me of another incident. You remember a while back when PUBG tried to sue, another Chinese Battle Royale game for supposedly using the same frying pan that PUBG had?
I believe it was Knives Out, I think. I don't remember the exact name, but yes, I do.
Do you think this is going to have the same frying pan, or are you just going to change it?
Oh, it's probably going to... This is the exact same game. They just changed the asset of really just the bullet splatter. That's all that seems to have changed. Is they took it down, they changed the name, they changed the effect, they put it back up, and it's so much of a... It seems like the same game because the same stats for players are still viewable in this reportedly new game. They really just put a new coat of paint over it, but the house inside is the same.
My God, that's... I mean, heck, if it's successful, it's successful. I can't really knock it till I try it. If I ever do get a chance to play the game, I suppose.
Yeah, I don't even know if it's over here in the West because we just have PUBG Mobile, because we don't have to bend over to the Chinese government to let a game make money.
Yeah, that is true. Anyways, on to the next little topic. Now. Last episode we talked a little bit about Avengers Endgame, and we gave our general review of it.
Spoiled the entire thing.
Spoiled the entire thing. If you haven't watched Endgame, don't watch the last episode, but we talked about Endgame.
Yeah. And
at the very end credits scene, there wasn't a scene. At the very end credits, all we got was just an audio clip of, some hammer being hit. We assumed that it was Tony Stark working on his armor in the first Iron Man movie. But it seems that now they finally have included a post-credits scene for the movie. And the scene itself is just the newly released trailer for Spider-Man Far From Home.
Which I believe we were talking about a little later.
Yes, we are going to be talking about it a little bit later. Now, I'm not honestly surprised. This isn't the first time we've had a full trailer put in as an end credits scene. The end of Captain America, the First Avenger, had the opening trailer for the Avengers movie before it came out.
Yeah, the end credit for Ant-Man wasn't a trailer, but it was just a scene from Captain America Civil War.
Right. So this isn't really too much of a surprise, but what is a surprise is that it was added after its theatrical release.
Yeah, that is kind of odd, because I remember their reasoning for not having one is that, Endgame was the end of this story. They didn't really need a post-credit scene to link it to the next chapter, because this was just the end. Which I kind of liked, but now we have just a full-on trailer at the end of it.
Well, remember, we were recently told that supposedly Spider-Man Far From Home is the actual end of the Infinity Saga and not Endgame, which is probably why they decided to add this trailer in as the post-credits scene.
I get the feeling Sony just screwed them with the release date, and they're trying to scramble to recover and make it look like this was all planned.
I mean, I suppose. But of all movies to get to have the trailer put in as a post credits, it's not really too much of a surprise to have Spider-Man Far From Home's trailer put in there, seeing as it is a direct continuation of what happens after Endgame. You know, I'd be a bit more upset if it were a trailer of a movie that had absolutely nothing to do with Endgame or anything like that, but at least they put a little bit of care in it, at least I hope.
Yeah.
You know. Anyways, go ahead and take away this next little topic, Brian. And now, ladies and gentlemen, this is a very important topic to us, so
Yes.
please listen in.
So, on Monday, 150 employees at Riot Games, the developers of the, popular game League of Legends, staged a walkout to protest the company's management. Now, there were multiple reasons for the walkout, including the ingrained sexist culture that was revealed last year in a Kotaku report, last September, I believe, as well as management's seeming refusal to actually try to deal with the problem, just paying lip service to it, and the practice of forced arbitration, which is where typically companies put this clause in an employee's contract where if the employee tries to sue them, they can just say, no, you have to go straight to two-party arbitration, where essentially the two sides argue with each other for whatever outcome instead of going straight to a trial with a judge.
Hardly ever has any positive results.
Hardly ever. And it's, typically there are NDAs and there's no trial with a judge or jury, potentially. Right. And Riot has actually recently tried to exercise this clause in the contract against 2 of the 5 former employees suing it. And now they have to make a motion with the judge to do it, and I don't know if we've seen the outcome of it yet, if the forced arbitration has been upheld. But many employees have, said, hey, take this clause out of our contract. And Riot has, again, paid something of lip service to it by saying, okay, well, all new employees don't have this, and after we're done with, the current ongoing litigation, we'll see about removing it from former employees' contracts. Of course, this litigation could last months or even years. And by that point, who says Riot won't just say, well, it's already in the contract, and there's nothing we can really do about it, so it's going to stay the way it is. Yeah. Now, this is actually the first major walkout at a video game studio or company or publisher. This is the first time something like this has happened in the video game industry, and this is hugely important because with the recent movements to get a union for game developers going, this could be an important step by showing that game developers can come together and act as one. That it isn't, just every company or even every man for themselves, that, a bunch of developers can come together. Because this was just one company, but it was 150 people.
Right.
And I think that's hugely important. And I think this is going to be hugely important in the moves towards unionization.
Yeah, I totally agree. Like you said, this is the very first time that this has happened. Now, while they're focused more on the clauses that are embedded in their contracts, this is a very important walkout because it's the beginning of people taking a stand against the management in the video games industry. Before this incident, and we've covered all these other incidents before, we've had numerous cases of employees being treated ridiculously unfairly by the higher-ups. Something that would not stand at all if they had just finally had a union. Mm-hmm. Employees were subjected to insane amounts of crunch time, causing large amounts of psychological stress and emotional damage and all that. And lots of employees got laid off out of nowhere. The whole Telltale Games incident is a clear example of why we need a union in the video games industry. And it's just kind of surprising that it took, even though it's happened, even though it's happening, and I'm really glad for it, I can't help but be a bit bummed out that it really took them this long, for people to finally say enough,
Mm-hmm. And it's, a lot of people ask, oh, why don't they just unionize? Unions are allowed, there's no union busting allowed. What people don't realize is a lot of the industries that have unions have had unions for close to or over a century now, like the film industry, the radio industry, and all these industries.
Screenwriters Guild, I believe.
Yeah, Screenwriters Guild, things like that. Those have existed since the early 1900s. And in the 1950s and 60s, during the entire Red Scare, anti-communist furor, a lot of legislation was passed that actually made it harder for unions to get formed under the guise that, unions are, a bit too socialist for America, when in reality it was, these industries trying to leverage the scare in order to make it harder for employees to have rights. So for industries that existed before this, again, film is the big one, it's, they already had established unions, so they're fairly okay. But video games, that industry only really started in the late 70s, early 80s. It's a really new industry, even though it's 30, going on 40 years old now.
Yeah, and granted, at the beginning of the age of video games, creating them might not have been as complicated as they are now, especially given that, they had to deal with, 8-bit, but then eventually 8-bit turned to 16-bit, then it turned to 32-bit, then 64-bit, then we started getting PlayStation 1 era graphics, and PlayStation 2, then 3, then 4, then next-gen consoles came out, and the amount of things that a game developer has to work on now has gotten more and more complicated over time, to where now it actually is starting to cause a great deal of stress to people who are actually working on things like this. Back then, maybe it wasn't. Maybe back then it wasn't as stressful to require a union, but now it most certainly is, because there's so many demands going on for games to be released that, in order for those demands to be met, we need to have some rights for our workers first.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know. I really hope that this walkout has some kind of a chain reaction. I really hope that some other companies are going to want to start walking out. People are going to start wanting to get their voices heard. Something. I really hope that this actually does lead to something. It's not just a one-time thing and then it's brushed under the rug.
Mm-hmm.
I really hope that isn't the case.
Yeah.
Anyways, on to a bit of a lighter topic. Disney has recently announced the release dates of the Avatar sequels and the next Star Wars trilogy. Now, in case you haven't been up on the info, Disney recently did acquire 20th Century Fox under its belt of many companies that they own now.
Mm-hmm.
And along with that, they also own the rights to James Cameron's Avatar?
Yeah,
James Cameron's Avatar. I always get the director's name wrong for some reason. But, starting with Avatar 2, releasing holiday 2021, the two series will be releasing alternating holidays for the next few years. Meaning we'll get an Avatar, then a Star Wars, then an Avatar, then a Star Wars, an Avatar, and a Star Wars.
Yeah. I mean, the Avatar sequels, I'm guessing they'll all probably be done by the time the first one releases, because they were filming all four of them back to back to back with a budget of $1 billion. Sorry, I'm never going to not be astounded by the amount of faith put in the sequels to a fairly, in my opinion, mediocre movie. I mean, yes, it looked very pretty for the time, but it was Fern Gully. It was Fern Gully. It was Fern Gully. It was Fern Gully in space, but it was Fern Gully. I mean, Fern Gully.
It was Fern Gully. And while it was a very beautiful movie, a huge portion of its credit that was given was because this came out around the time that IMAX was just starting to become a really big thing.
Yeah, it was the big IMAX 3D futuristic graphics, and again, for the time, and even now, it holds up really well because of how far ahead it was. But
story-wise, it's not all that much that people are trying to chalk it up to be.
And it made $2 billion at the box office.
Yeah.
$2 billion. This was, 3 years before Avengers broke $1 billion and started this craze of, $1 billion being the milestone for summer blockbusters.
Right. And, granted, an Avatar sequel might be pretty good, because it did leave off to a cliffhanger, and there could be a lot more that could be addressed and whatnot, but...
Do we need 4 of them?
Do we need 4 sequels to Avatar? I can imagine a second one, maybe even a third one.
Mm-hmm.
But a fourth one seems like it's going a little too far, in my opinion.
And I could be okay with a fourth one down the line, but the fact that all 4 of them have already been filmed, and essentially, it's insane that this much effort is being put into something that could fail abysmally. $1 billion on a bet that people are going to want to see 4 Avatar movies over the course of, 7, 8 years? That's...
Mm-hmm. Around that time, yeah.
Yeah, I'm not going to see them all. I may not see any of them because I just don't care enough about Avatar because it came out 10 years ago or 12 years by the time the first sequel releases.
Right. But we also have the Star Wars movies that are coming out. Now, we're not sure whether or not we're getting the trilogy by Rian Johnson, the guy who worked on Star Wars The Last Jedi, or if we're getting the trilogy made by the people who worked on Game of Thrones. What were their names again?
David Benioff and D.B. Weiss. And honestly, we're not entirely sure this is a trilogy. We're just kind of assuming, given, it's 3 films being released 2 years apart, kind of like this trilogy has been. Mm-hmm. I mean, it could theoretically just be 3 spin-off movies, but somehow I doubt that.
Yeah, honestly, I kind of doubt it too. And in all fairness, eventually I hope we reach a point in time where we don't need trilogies at all. Because I think one of the things that was holding back the Star Wars franchise was the fact that it was all surrounded around a saga. And when movies tend to be tied to a saga, you don't really get too much breathing room because as more movies in that saga gets released, you have a whole lot of stuff that you have to be chained down to. You can't be you have less creative freedoms because you have to do things for the sake of the saga,
Yeah, and I feel like the only reason Star Wars continues to be this set of trilogies is because George Lucas really liked trilogies. He really liked this, mega 3-act structure. Yeah. But I don't think it needs to be that way. Like, I think the prequel movies could have just been 2 movies if you'd cut down a lot of the extraneous parts.
I agree with you there. There were a lot of portions in the episodes 1 through 3 where it felt like there was a lot of filler just to make it 3 different movies in a saga. Mm-hmm. They could have done time skips to Anakin being a kid, then being young, then being a young adult and whatnot, so. But we didn't get that. And that's in the past. But, again, we don't really have any info on the new trilogy or trilogies that are coming out in the first place. So, but we just wanted to let y'all know about the new release dates that are coming out for these and everything. Mm-hmm. Anyways, go ahead and take away the next topic, man, then we'll jump right into trailer talk.
So Ilphonic, the developers of the recent Friday the 13th game where you had 8 campers going up against the one superpowered Jason, have recently announced another game in a similar vein. Predator Hunting Grounds will be a 4v1 asymmetric survival horror game where you have 4 soldiers in the jungle trying to hunt down and kill the Predator. The famous movie Alien. And the squad of 4 will be your typical military dudes. They'll have, they'll have automatic weaponry, they'll have grenades, things like that, while the Predator will be outfitted with things like active camo and its plasma blaster, which it seems it can be fun. The game is expected to release on PS4 in 2020. And honestly, I don't have a lot of opinions about this game, mainly because I just guess it's not that surprising, given that it's very similar to Ilphonic's last game, and it's also part of this larger trend of 80s horror icons being made into these 4v1 or 8v1 or a team v1 monster horror survivals. Like there's Predator, there's the Friday the 13th game, there's Dead by Daylight, which has both Freddy Krueger and Michael Myers
and Leatherface
and Jigsaw, though that's not an 80s thing, but it still bears. Mm-hmm. And it's just really the only major ones we're missing at this point are an Alien game like this and Chucky.
Right. But the whole 4v1 didn't necessarily originate in the whole 80s horror genre. We started off with, I believe, Prey or Evolve, where it was 3 players go against 1 player who was a monster.
And I mean, it's not a revolutionary thing. Mods have been doing it for a while, but Evolve was really the first AAA game to do it, and then completely collapse under its own ego.
Right. But, I do have to admit, this game idea sounds perfect. Mm-hmm. I've watched Predator movies in the past, and what this game sounds like is exactly what the movie is. Your ragtag team of military people, they each have their own little specialty. This is why the Predator picks them. Because it's hardly ever just random soldiers. They're usually selected for a reason, And that's usually what the movie was. It was these guys trying to survive while dealing with somebody who's got tactics way beyond what they have. And it's a whole matter of trying to use your brain to try and figure out ways to take him down. Like how in Friday the 13th, the video game, you had to rely on teamwork and your specialties to come up with ways to stand off against Jason while also trying to come up with your eventual escape.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so it sounds very possible, I suppose.
Yeah, when I first heard about it, I was fairly down on the game because I didn't think it did anything new. And then it occurred to me, does it really need to do anything new? Because it's theming itself around the Predator. It seems like the Predator will have its own, movie-accurate abilities. It's, smaller than Ilphonic's last game with only 4 people versus the monster instead of 8, which will probably help a lot with matchmaking.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And honestly, this is going to be a niche game, and for the people that like that niche, cool. This game isn't hurting me. This game isn't really hurting the industry. It's just I don't really have much of an opinion on it besides cool for the people that like it.
Right. I kind of have the same opinion, too. It doesn't really need to do anything groundbreaking because it is a bit of a niche. One thing that I've noticed lately is, certain types of video games that are very popular, like a year ago, are starting to become very niche. Like I remember last year that the Battle Royale genre was a amazing, groundbreaking thing, even though PlayStation 2 version of Battlefront had this basically. But PUBG came out, and then Fortnite came out, and those were like the major Battle Royale games. But nowadays, we have tons of Battle Royale games that are available for people to play, all granted not as popular as PUBG or Fortnite. But so many have been made to where Battle Royale has kind of gone from this groundbreaking genre to slowly becoming just a niche game, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I think this is actually good for the industry because what the AAA industry always tries to do is they find the one thing they like and they just hammer it over and over again. Like 10 years ago, it was the modern military shooter, even the World War II shooter a few years earlier than that. Now it's Battle Royale. But there needs to be a place for these niche games, this 4v1 horror game where you fight the Predator. That's not going to be the game that sets the world on fire, but it's going to do moderately well, hopefully. I mean, it could flop. But hopefully it does moderately well, because we need these games that don't set the world on fire. We need these middle ground games that are just okay for the people that like them.
Yeah, makes me think about the old PlayStation 1, PlayStation 2 era, where they weren't necessarily trying to be groundbreaking, the brand new breath of fresh air. They were just riding on what was popular, and the PlayStation 1 and PS2 era are also, ironically, the era where there were tons of games that were hugely popular that weren't really trying to be unique. They were just the new game on the block to play,
Mm-hmm.
And if we get back to that era where it's not necessarily that everybody's trying to be brand new, they're just trying to give their own take on the genre, I think video games might do a little bit better in the industry.
Yeah.
Anyways, ladies and gentlemen, that about does it for this segment of the weekly recap. And now, without further ado, it is time for us to go into trailer talk. Now, trailer talk is where Brian and I will talk about some of the trailers that have come out within this week and give our general opinion on them. Now, these trailers are available right now on YouTube. Feel free to check them out. Now, as far as getting the general info on most of these videos, I would suggest using Google and not YouTube channels. I'm only sidetracking here because there's a couple of channels that I'll get trailers from, and their information is way off from what it should be. Every so often I'll watch a trailer, and they don't even have the main actor listed in the starring sections. Like, they play favorites at times, A little weird. But anyways, we'll start off with the trailer for Spider-Man Far From Home. Now, I'm going to try my best to avoid anything Endgame related in this trailer because, as we noted earlier, this is following the events right after Endgame.
Yeah, we're going to sort of be dodging around because this trailer actually came prefaced with Tom Holland saying, hey, if you haven't seen Endgame, this trailer has spoilers in it. So we're going to try to maneuver around the spoilers as best we can. If you've seen our Endgame review, you'll probably know what we're talking about.
Right. So, with Spider-Man Far From Home, it involves Peter Parker, played by Tom Holland, taking a trip out to, it was Europe, right?
Yeah, it's like a tour across Europe.
Yeah.
We see them in Venice. At one point, they're in London.
Yeah. And Spider-Man is trying to take a break. He's on vacation.
Yeah.
But at the same time as he's been doing this, he's been avoiding calls from Nick Fury, the head of S.H.I.E.L.D. Eventually, he does confront Peter and tell him that he needs him to help with a huge situation which might involve a hole in the multiverse.
Yeah.
And it's also at this point in time that we are introduced to Jake Gyllenhaal's Mysterio. Now, in the trailer, he's portrayed as a good guy right now. And basically, he's helping Spider-Man deal with, like, these weird elemental creatures.
Yeah.
There's one that's completely made out of fire, one that's completely made out of water and stuff like that. And for the most part, it's a trailer showing off the cool action scenes that are in there. We get to see Spider-Man wear a fire-retardant spider suit, which looks eerily similar to the Spider-Noir suit from the comic books.
Yeah.
You know, so I thought that was a cool little touch in there, in my opinion. But so far, that's all we know. Spider-Man's helping Mysterio to fight these villains, which might possibly have created a hole in the multiverse. But I think he's just straight up lying.
Yeah, so the setup here is that Mysterio is claiming to be a hero from another universe that has come to ours to try to prevent a catastrophe and is working with Nick Fury and Maria Hill to do that. Now, it's hard to tell what the truth is here, because traditionally Mysterio has been, the illusionary trickster who, before the multiverse thing, I assumed he was the one creating these elementals to portray himself as a hero and probably make money and something like that. But now with this multiverse angle, that would be a really weird detail to add to this entire thing if he were just, trying to make money off this and were creating them on his own. So it makes me think that the multiverse may actually be a thing and is finally being introduced to the MCU now. Now, whether Mysterio is actually a good guy or not, I'm leaning towards he's still probably a villain. He's probably here for his own purposes, but I'd be fully willing to believe that he is actually from another universe.
Possibly. Unfortunately, the whole thing is fake. The whole thing is a setup. Even the monsters that Spider-Man is fighting, given that they even used flames and everything, I think they are legit fake because of Mysterio's origin story. In the comic books, Mysterio was this special effects artist for films and everything. And one day, he really wanted to be seen as a superhero, being inspired by other superheroes that he sees on the news, Spider-Man being one of those heroes. So, he dons himself with the Mysterio suit, fishbowl and all. And he fools the audience with a series of very elaborate illusions and machinery and robotic clone units and everything. And people assume that he is a superhero. Until one day, Spider-Man comes along to help out Mysterio, only to find out that the entire thing is fake. And Mysterio, in a fit of rage, ends up fighting Spider-Man. And that's what created the whole rivalry between them in the first place. And given that origin and how often that origin is used, I just can't help but think there is no way this guy is being genuine. There's no way, even though it looks so real, a part of me just keeps wanting to say this is fake. The whole thing is fake.
Yeah, and I do think he's lying, but I think since this is being billed as, the end of Phase 3 and the end of the Infinity Saga, basically, that wouldn't it be a hell of a way to go out and set up the next phase is to introduce the multiverse. And who knows, maybe Mysterio comes from a dimension where, say, there's a school in upstate New York with a bunch of mutants, or there's a skyscraper in Manhattan with a big 4 on the side.
In that sense, that could be true, especially because Disney bought the rights to Fox. Mm-hmm. And because they bought the rights to Fox, they now have the rights to not only X-Men, but the Fantastic Four, as well as Deadpool, and I want to say Ghost Rider as well.
They already had the rights to Ghost Rider.
Oh, okay.
There's an entire thing.
Okay, I thought that was a whole Marvel Knights situation, but I digress. But, yeah, the idea of a multiverse would be pretty interesting. However, I wouldn't be... if there is a multiverse, and I didn't really think I'd hear myself saying this, I'm not really interested in seeing the whole Spider-Verse thing. because we gotten Spider-Man into the Spider-Verse, which did, from what I heard, it did such a great job at handling the Spider-Verse. We don't really need a live-action Spider-Verse.
Yeah, the Spider-Verse seems to be a much looser concept than, like, the DC Universe or the MCU. Like, Spider-Man into the Spider-Verse is part of the Spider-Verse, and Venom is part of the Spider-Verse, and technically Tom Holland's Spider-Man is part of the Spider-Verse. And they're all... It's sort of this more loosely connecting web than an actual full-on universe, it seems. It's more of a framing device so, you know, you can have Venom without Spider-Man, but he's still part of the Spider-Man mythos.
Right. So, you know, if they do a multiverse, that'd be a great way to introduce some characters that we haven't gotten yet in the MCU. If they did a live-action Spider-Verse, I guess I wouldn't really have too many complaints, but I would like to see Sam Raimi's Spider-Man at one point in time.
I would like to... Apparently, for Into the Spider-Verse, there was a proposed scene of all the live-action Spider-Man coming in an animated form and meeting up for the first time, but it was cut because they didn't want to confuse the audience and they were already running a little long on time.
Ah, that would have been so cool. That would have been so cool. Anyways, on to the next trailer. Now, this is a trailer for a psychological horror called The Lodge. Its U.S. release date is sometime in 2019. They haven't given us an official month nor an official day just yet. It is starring Richard Armitage, Alicia Silverstone, Riley Keough, and many others. Synopsis is that a soon-to-be stepmom is snowed in with her fiancé's 2 children at a remote holiday village. Just as relations begin to thaw between the trio, some strange and frightening events take place. Directed by Severin Fiala and Veronica Franz. Now, this trailer it's an interesting one. It reminds me more along the lines of a Jordan Peele horror. Where it's not so much of like you see scary monsters and you're freaking out and there's jump scares everywhere. It's more the sense that psychologically there is something weird going on in the house. The stepmom that I talked about in the synopsis, it's heavily implied that she is the one surviving person in a cult suicide along the lines of Heaven's Gate, something like that.
Wow.
And she is the only survivor. And she dates this guy and she invites him and his kids to go up with her to this cabin out in the snow. You know, and she really wanted to connect with them. And, you know, it's the obvious trope. The kids don't really warm up to the stepmom just yet, you know. But they start to, but then eventually the boyfriend leaves and then they're snowed in. And then as they're snowed in, the kids find out about the suicide cult and she's trying to warm up to them and everything. Then we get this implication that maybe there's a cult member there. Maybe she's having a psychological breakdown. We're not sure what's going on. And they can't escape the cabin. The 3 of them can't escape because it's snowed in. And I thought it was so interesting because it gives this implication of, is something wrong with her or is somebody there? Because occasionally we hear the words, repent. Repent for your sins. You know, echo in the house and everything. But the audio and the level of audio sounds so similar to a video clip that the kids watched of the preacher from the cult saying those exact same words and everything, you know. And I thought that was interesting because, as I said, this is a very interesting kind of horror film. It's not your run-of-the-mill thing. It reminds me a lot of Jordan Peele films, like Get Out, for example, you know.
What do you think the odds are that one of the kids is evil?
That one of the kids is evil?
Because whenever I see a horror movie with kids in it, I always think there's at least a 40% chance that kid is going to turn out to be evil.
I'd give it at least a 15% chance.
Okay.
Because while it is implied that these kids don't like the stepmom, you don't get any vibes that these kids are evil. You get these vibes that something might not be right with the stepmom, but you also can't confirm that something's not right with her, you know. So I don't think the kids would be the overall focus of the horror film. If anything, it'd probably be about them trying to survive with the stepmom or without her. I can't even really tell with this trailer, you know. So next trailer that we have to talk about is the first trailer for Where'd You Go, Bernadette? And I actually did think this was like a very interesting comedy based off of a runaway novel. Its U.S. release date is March 22nd, 2019, starring Kate Blanchett, Judy Greer, Kristen Wiig, and many others. The synopsis is that after her anxiety-ridden mother disappears, 15-year-old B does everything she can to track her down, discovering her troubled past in the process, and is directed by Richard Linklater. Now, Kate Blanchett plays as Bernadette Fox, this real famous architect. At least she was 20 years ago. And then she kind of just retired, fell off the face of the earth. Then the very beginning of the trailer, it's revealed that she doesn't even have any business cards with her anymore. And in the time of her retirement, things just start to go very bad. She doesn't take too much care of her house, and in the process, it accidentally creates a landslide, which almost destroys her neighbor's house and everything. Just a huge series of things. And then one day, she tells her daughter that she's got a very important assignment that she has to deal with. And at some random point in time, she figures, while everybody else is out in the room in her house, arguing with each other over what happened with the neighbor's house, she closes the bathroom door, and when they open the door, they find the windows open, and she is gone. She has just completely disappeared. And we're also given implications that she's doing an assignment, some project out in Antarctica, which is just going to be constant work, grueling and everything, but it's a whole matter of everybody trying to figure out where she is while also discovering a little bit about her backstory. Now, normally with films like this, I'm not entirely interested. I've never really been one for the whole runaway movies and whatnot, because usually the reasons for them running away always seem, kind of petty. It's just like, people don't really like me, so I'm just going to run off, and hopefully I'll find a reason for everybody to like me. But this one just seems more like, this one actually has a reason for it. She's trying to get herself back into the business and everything, being that legendary architect that she is. And I'm also interested in finding out a little bit more about her past and her backstory and things like that. So I thought that was pretty good. I wanted to give that trailer a mention. Now, the last trailer that we have to talk about before we wrap things up is the trailer for It Chapter 2. I didn't put down the general information, but it is available on YouTube for you to check out. I remember, now, I did get to watch all of the It Chapter 1, the remake that came out recently. I didn't get to watch all of it. I got to see little bits and clips here and there. But I did get the general vibe of what it was focusing on. It was focusing more on the whole silent, suspenseful horror. It's like, the monster's coming to get you, but at the same time, you can't tell, like, at what second it's going to appear and get you. And I guess it was also a bit more terrifying because of the fact that it was happening to kids. Whenever you have the kid being chased by a monster in a horror movie, that always seems a lot more suspenseful than it happening to a grown adult. Grown adults have a lot more ability to fend for themselves against some unknown supernatural horror, whereas a kid, they're a lot more terrified. They might panic a lot more. They might not know the right actions and everything. And I think this contributed to It Chapter 1 being very, very scary. Mm-hmm. Then we have Chapter 2's trailer. So far from what I've seen from this trailer, it doesn't feel like a horror movie. It feels more like just one movie-length episode of Supernatural, but with a way bigger cast of main characters dealing with Pennywise the Clown. Which, makes sense, given that the second chapter is just about them trying to stop him while he's hunting down other children and everything. But from what I saw from the trailer, I got no sense of terror. I wasn't on the edge of my seat or anything. And I was talking to Brian about this one scene, okay? So, like, the girl from the Losers Club, I kind of forgot everybody's names, but she's talking to this one lady who she eventually finds out is, like, Pennywise's daughter. And she goes into the kitchen to, like, she had cookies in the oven and everything while she's gone. The girl is walking around in the house, and she looks at a picture which shows Pennywise standing there with his daughter in a real old-timey, cowboyish-looking picture. And while she's looking at this, behind her is, like, a doorway, like this one right here. And as she's doing this, you know, looking at this picture, there's this like creature, which I guess is the Pennywise's daughter, is like, you know, all flesh, but only like a loincloth or something like that. And it quickly makes its way across the hallway, I guess trying to look like Grudge fashion or something like that. But the way that this monster went through the hallway looked so much like a Fortnite dance, you know, when they're dancing like that, making its way across the hallway, that I burst out into laughter watching that trailer. It's like you had this small little bit of suspense filling up, and then you just break out into laughter watching that thing. It caught me off guard. So, I mean, for a second chapter, I mean, as far as the Grown Up Losers Club looks, they look okay, you know, as you would expect for, you know, people like James McAvoy and others being in the film now. But I wouldn't really say that you'll probably be watching this movie with a huge sense of fear and dread. But then again, this is the first trailer. You know, we usually when it comes to movies, the first trailer always gives us the least context, as opposed to the second trailer, which gives us a lot more context into the film. Mm-hmm. But that was my general opinion of it, you know. I know you're not really a big fan of horror films and whatnot, but from what I've seen, It Chapter 2 does not really seem scary at all.
Hopefully this is just a bad trailer, because I've heard the first, you know, half of the remake was really good as an adaptation, and as just a general horror movie.
Oh yeah, the first one was very much a general horror film. Very, very Stephen King-ish. You just got that vibe that it was a Stephen King novel come to life, but I'm not really sure about the second chapter. But that's my opinion. I'm pretty sure that you folks might enjoy it yourselves. Be more than welcome to watch it, and we'd love to hear your opinions on it. But anyways, with that being said, we've reached the end of today's episode of the Phone Booth. As always, my name is Edward Heitman. Joining me in the studio is my good friend and co-host, Brian Rodriguez.
See ya.
Be sure to tune in every Saturday from 1 to 2 here on the Voice of San Joaquin, where we cover all things pop culture related. From movies to video games to TV shows to comic books, you name it, we do our very best to cover it. Now, with that being said, please have yourselves a wonderful, wonderful afternoon.
Avatar's just Fern Gully.